Hello and welcome to lecture number 3. Today's topic will be civil liberties. We'll explore the Bill of Rights in a fair amount of detail. A good place to begin a discussion of civil liberties would be to address all of the rights that are protected by the amendments in the Constitution. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to rewrite different amendments included in the Bill of Rights in your own words, and then evaluate which you believe to be the most important. Just a quick description of the Bill of Rights. These were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that were ratified by the end of 1791. These placed limits on what the government could and could not do. When it comes to the Bill of Rights, there's an important concept that's key to remember. No single right is absolute. My freedom to do something ends when it has the potential to trample on the rights of others, whether it's free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, whatever it may be. These are key limits to our individual rights. Now, we won't be exploring every single amendment included in the Bill of Rights, but we'll hit some of the highlights. Possibly the most important would be the First Amendment. Here we see the text of the First Amendment. A bunch of lawyers wrote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof," and you can read the rest of this. Okay, so a bunch of lawyers wrote that First Amendment over 200 years ago. What does that actually mean? Well, political scientists and historians have basically said the First Amendment includes 5 so-called freedoms. We have freedom of religion, speech and press, to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government. Let's explore freedom of religion next. One of the key ideas included in freedom of religion would be the Establishment Clause. It comes from the text in the Constitution, or in the First Amendment, that says, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." A lot of times people have used this as a shorthand for the meaning of separation of church and state. This means that the government cannot force people to belong to one church or to any church, or cannot favor one religion over another. The words separation of church and state do not appear in the Constitution. They actually were coined by the gentleman shown here, Thomas Jefferson. There's also a free exercise clause included in the First Amendment. This allows people to practice their religious beliefs with as little government involvement as possible. However, some practices can and have been prohibited. For example, if I wanted to start my own religion, and we had human sacrifice as one of our rituals, that would not be allowed. While that may be an extreme example, practices such as polygamy and snake handling have been prohibited in the past. Now, when it comes to freedom of religion, this does not mean that the government can't aid religion in some way. There was an important case called the Lemon Decision from the 1970s that resulted in the so-called Lemon Test. The government can provide aid to church-related schools. Let's just say something like if a parochial school, a Catholic school, wanted to combine with a public school to have busing, they could do something like that. However, there were limits to the aid that the government could provide these churches. The aid had to be secular in purpose, not for religious reasons or religious curriculum. It cannot promote one religion over another or inhibit religion, and it should not excessively involve the government. Freedom of speech and press are also included in these 5 freedoms. Free speech is protected by the Constitution. There's a clear statement that declares, "Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech." Yet, remember that key concept to keep in mind? No single right is absolute. So there are limits on our ability to speak. For example, we could yell fire in a movie theater, but we could be held liable for that because that could cause chaos in a stampede and people could get hurt. Here's another thing. Slander is an oral statement that's damaging to a victim, and that's illegal. We clearly have freedom of the press. Part of the First Amendment declares Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of the press, yet no single right is absolute. So we could be held for libel if we have a written statement that damages a victim's reputation. Two other rights included in the First Amendment protect our ability to assemble or to gather as long as we're peaceful. And we also have the right to petition the government. We can complain, we can write our congressmen, we can write our congresswomen, we can write our senators or the president, and actually ask the government to take action and not be held liable or go into prison for doing something like that. So let's address something that's less controversial, like the Second Amendment. Here's the text of the Second Amendment. I'll let you go ahead and read it yourselves. We actually did not know the true meaning of the Second Amendment until a court case called the Heller Decision was handed down by our courts in 2008. The bottom line was that this gave Americans an individual right to keep and bear arms. We never had a court recognize that before 2008. However, the court also said that our right to keep and bear arms can be regulated by the states and the federal government.
Remember that survey of your political views that you filled out at the beginning of the semester? Well, I wasn't able to get this semester's results yet, but the last time I conducted this was in January of 2022. One of the questions is shown here. There are multiple gun regulations in place today. There's no need for additional legislation. While the students who took this survey last January were somewhat split, we see that 50% are opposed to this particular statement. Here's another question from that same survey. Do you think owners of handguns should be required to register them? What we see here is pretty consistent and strong support for this type of gun control legislation. However, people are split on many others. And just to let you know, there were about 70 students who took the survey last January, and I hope to include some of the results of our class as the semester moves on.
The bottom line when it comes to the Second Amendment is that we have an individual right to keep and bear arms. Yet, what the National Rifle Association might think is a just and logical regulation, and what a gun control organization like the Brady campaign might think might be two different things. And so that's where we get division along the political spectrum. In the next section, we'll explore due process and amendments 4 through 8. Essentially, due process requires the government to follow a set of guidelines or procedures if we are accused of a crime. These rights are found in Amendments 4 through 8. The Fourth Amendment declares that we have the right to privacy in our homes. We have protection against unreasonable searches. However, no single right is absolute. So the police can search our homes as long as there's probable cause. They also need a search warrant. Additionally, if we consent to a search, there's no need for a search warrant, and the police can search our homes or cars.
An example of this took place just recently. In August of 2022, the FBI executed a search warrant at President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Some people have called this a raid on the president's property, but in fact, the FBI had reason to believe that there were improper materials located at President Trump's residence, so they developed a search warrant, and this was executed by the FBI. This took place after several months of discussions where the FBI tried to get the materials back from President Trump. These discussions actually started in May of 2021. The reason why they did execute this search warrant is because they believed that classified material was located at Mar-a-Lago. So we'll be learning more about this, I suspect, as the semester continues.
The Fifth Amendment protects us in many ways. For a major crime like murder, kidnapping, bank robbery, something like that, a grand jury would need to investigate the charges against us. It couldn't just be a single prosecutor. We also have protection against double jeopardy. Essentially, this means that we cannot be charged for the same crime twice. Additional rights are also included in the Fifth Amendment. If we're accused of a crime, we cannot be forced to incriminate ourselves. And our property cannot be taken from us without due process or without fair compensation. Each of these is included in the Fifth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment also covers due process. It outlines a series of rights that defendants have. If we're accused of a crime, we have the right to a speedy trial. We also can have a jury of our peers, and that trial can take place where that alleged crime was committed. If people are testifying against us, well, we can question those people. We can also bring our own witnesses to defend ourselves. We also have the right to an attorney. And we can get one, even if we can't afford one, if we face jail time for the offense that we're charged with. I'm going to skip the Seventh Amendment, go straight to the Eighth. The Eighth is pretty straightforward. It protects us against cruel and unusual punishment. For example, the government can't torture us. Also, the punishment for a crime should fit the crime. I did want to address the Ninth Amendment as well. Here's the text of the Ninth Amendment. A bunch of lawyers wrote, "The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." What the heck is that supposed to mean? Okay, I'll try to break it down. Essentially, the Ninth Amendment argues that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights provides a list of several rights for us. However, the people have other rights as well. It would be impossible to list every single right that people have. So there are other rights that exist, they're just not written down. The last topic I'd like to address would be the issue of privacy. The word privacy doesn't appear in the Bill of Rights. However, it's seen in a variety of ways, particularly in the Fourth Amendment and Ninth Amendment. That's where it's implied. The right to privacy was applied to a woman's right to have an abortion in a Supreme Court case from the 1970s. This was Roe versus Wade. What it did was it allowed women to have access to an abortion during the first trimester of a pregnancy. During the second trimester, states could regulate access to abortions. And during the third trimester, states could prohibit abortions.
I suspect many of you are familiar with the Dobbs decision, which was handed down in the summer of 2022. This struck down Roe v. Wade because the Supreme Court argued that it was egregiously wrongly decided. This is an example of judicial review. Our courts looking at the laws, looking at the Constitution, and they determined that the national government shouldn't be deciding this issue, but that states would decide the legal status of abortion within their state boundaries. So this is an example of one of those checks and balances put in place by the framers of the Constitution.
Well, we're just about at the end. I'd like to have some concluding statements next. Now that you've gone through this lecture, you should be able to summarize the rights protected by the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to show a deep understanding by rewriting them in your own words and describing the rights that are protected. You'll also want to evaluate which you believe to be the single most important right. Well, that's it for today. I hope you learned something new. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.